Everybody, and welcome to the kickoff reading of the 15th season of the Milwaukie Poetry Series. I'm Tom Hogan from the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee, and I want to welcome you here tonight. Thank you for supporting us and for being here. Thank you for supporting us through this time at the Pond House, at the Letting Library, at St. John the Evangelist in Milwaukie, and now at the Willamette Falls Media Center here in Oregon City. We are live streaming tonight from the Willamette Falls Media Center here in Oregon City. And our poet tonight is Marilyn Johnston. But before I introduce her, I want to say a couple of things about the series this year. Firstly, we do have a poster that's in process. And the poster is going to be coming at some point very soon. And when it's ready and available, we will get it out to you. This year, secondly, we have 11 readings. We've decided to expand and add a bonus reading of an out-of-state poet. Our poet from out of state this year is Christopher Howell, and he's going to be reading in December, and he's from the state of Washington. We have a new website. So sometime during the season, we're going to be getting a new website. I also want to say thanks to a number of people. Thanks to the city of Milwaukie for their support. They have been supportive of us from the very beginning of the series back in 2007. Thanks to the Letting Library. We are a committee of the Letting Library in Milwaukie. And so we really appreciate the support that they've given us. Thanks to the committee, the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee, because as you know, and I say this, that you don't have something happen unless you have a group of people working on it. And we have a great group of people on the committee. I want to welcome my lovely wife, Jane, who is sitting here to my right. She's part of the audience, and we're going to be participating in the Q&A when we get to that. Because we will be having a question and answer period at the end of Marilyn's reading. So, our poet tonight is Marilyn Johnston, and we're excited to have her here. We're excited about starting the series and kicking it off tonight. She is a writer and a filmmaker. She has received writing fellowships from Oregon Literary Arts and the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund for Women, and was the winner of the Donna J. Stone National Library Award for Poetry. A Robert Penn Warren Writing Competition Prize, and the Salmon Creek Journal's Flash Fiction Contest. She is the author of Red Dust Rising, a chapbook of poems about her family's healing from war, nominating for a Pushcart Prize, and a full collection Before Igniting, published in 2020. She lives east of Salem in the village of McCleary and teaches creative writing in the artists and the school program, primarily working with incarcerated youth. Would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Marilyn Johnston. Marilyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom and Jane and Bev and Josh here at the Willamette Falls Media, and all the people that you mentioned that made this possible tonight. It's so good to be here. And I want to give a special thanks to all of you on live stream, because without your encouragement and support of listening to our words, it would make this kind of a hollow venture. Thank you, thank you. I think of poetry as much of what we do, like driftwood, helping to make sense of what was broken to get here. Well, we've got a lot of things that give fodder to that, that have been scattered around the last year and a half. In this divided world, we've had pandemics, fires, storms, protests against injustices, and challenging people who are deniers, as well as helping those we love recover from war, however it's defined. And with it all, through poetry can come revelation and the chance to heal. At least it seems something that we can strive for. Tonight I'll be touching on a lot of these themes and reading a sample of older poems, work from my current collection before igniting, and some new work. And I don't know, Tom, if it's possible that they will be able to put things in the Q&A.
Yes, they can.
Oh, great. And I really encourage you, and they can put comments.
I should have mentioned that the chat feature is active. And so if there is a question that someone wants to ask Marilyn, put it in the chat. And we will try and pull as many of those as we can up at the Q&A period at the end.
That's awesome. Without being able to see you and have that dialogue face to face, if anything resonates that I read, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. That would be wonderful to read later. So thank you. So much of what has happened over the last year and a half, we can almost say that a lot of the ventures we've had, we didn't even have to go past our yard, except to maybe dip our toes in the river. So I'd like to start with a poem that I wrote at the very beginning of the pandemic about what was going on in our yard. My husband talks about COVID-19 as if he's still on patrol. Anytime going out from the base camp, you take your chance with snipers. You take a risk, even all suited up with night gear, thick flak jacket and combat boots, M16 at the ready. It's hard to tell the difference between friend or foe without a scope, how they can trick you and kill you, even someone symptomless, even if you have your helmet in place. Even with masks and gloves, you take a chance with the things you can't see. All suited up, you could take a shot in the neck or an artery hit in the leg, somewhere that's vital. So you cover and lay low, even on base, where a rocket can zero in and find you. The fear of friendly fire, the wife and kids come back from the store, infect you without warning. And triage will become unreliable once overwhelmed with casualties. And again, it's a matter of luck or fate who lives or dies. Now, the helicopters are circling the perimeter of our house, and someone has to be in charge, ready to drop the red smoke grenades to mark the landing zone. And he's on duty, his restless legs once again waking us as he prepares for an enemy that refuses to show its face. Mending. We've escaped the fires, the Drosophila spotted wing flies that decimated the cherry trees. Finally fixed the gaping hole in the roof after the ice storm that left pine and birch tree limbs laying like weapons stacked in the yard. We filled a notebook with names of tree trimmers and haulers, anyone with a truck and a power saw, anyone with a back that could allow them to drag and to pitch, someone licensed and bonded in case the neighbor's fence, the part that still stands, suffers a blow. The fir trees in the field seem to stand like soldiers ready to shield us from whatever threatens to crest the hill. Finally, spring flowers, a time to mend, fences, roofs, the suturing of wounded trees. Now, summer again, and we're trying hard to dream peace, and we're packing light. And I mentioned about putting a toe in the river. at the North Fork. We follow the curve of the river until the lines on our map grow faint, then disappear. Over 40 years ago, we first hiked this winding stream. We were untested then, the route unproven. In class, I asked my students to write a letter giving advice to their future selves. I wonder what we'd have said back then. Would the rough surfaces we've traveled since been averted by a cautionary route? The water threads its way among the soft hills, dipping to a beach of rocks left barren by creeks that once fed them, long dried after the mild winter and a summer of no rains. We scramble down to the gravel bar, sit side by side, our socks and shoes off, our feet dipped in the orange and gold reflection of autumn leaves. And it's still there, that fork in the river we first saw back when we were so sure, too young to mistrust the one we took. And this one, I'd like to read from the collection, Exit Plan. It's possible that nothing will happen, that the four walls of this house will stand long after the crushing winds and the trees that sway and bend without reaching down to pin us deep with their heavy boughs. Once, when the cries within threatened us with their terrible nightmares, we talked about how we'd exit, find each other again by feel after crawling to the burning door. But the truth is, there are so few days left to practice the art of survival, how we could run away and start again, take only memories of all we've learned in our scarred, empty hands. One of the things that I've been involved in these last year has been an honor to be one of 9 poets in an anthology, along with artists, as a result of the death of George Floyd. It's an anthology called Enough, Say Their Names. I wrote this poem as a persona poem after attending a Black Lives Matter rally here in Oregon. The price we pay for not listening to each other's stories. What matters? We left the premises weeks ago, the day the belching stack stopped and the whistle ceased, bringing the men and us few women down to the yard to click in and clock out. Hundreds of us at a time with our lunch pails and our dignity tied in a knot, boots drudging into a day without sunshine on either end of our shifts. With news of the furlough, we filed out and went home, even those of us who barely still had one, and no one to listen as the virus hit, and the unemployment funds too were lost in a vacuous space. It was in the night I remembered we left him behind and the shuffle of leaving. We'd worked like robots that last week on the line, took turns on break, creating a monument that we all carved in stone, left over in the supply yard so anyone could see. The likeness of his head gazing above the stacks, hope in his eyes, head tipped to heaven. Regret for all we've lost. I had to say goodbye to this man. No knee now to hold him fast. Not a day gone by since I haven't walked back there and looked up, trying to see what he sees. And today, once again, I am swept into the march as it turns the corner, and we chant in unison for Black Lives Matter, and we chant for all of us not embraced by the village, fearing we will need to burn it down to feel its warmth. And this poem resulted in a very impactful moment I had after a language school in Chiapas, Mexico in fall of 2019, as I witnessed Central American refugees crossing the border, headed toward the US border. I, refugee. The night cries with the sounds of women and children moving from one refugee camp to the other, the ones who have made it as far as this. No matter if a wall divides us, I can break through from these iron stars I see in the small yard outside my casita. Some days I can feel I am at the microcosm of the world, powerful, able to reach across cosmos. But today there is nothing but endless holes, my reach barren. Why now, when there is still much to do? Why now, when the channels are filled with rage, do I feel helplessly wandering to the future, then backstepping to the past, as if the sheer presence of my molecules has pierced the atmosphere, then burned out, leaving a faint trace in descent? I am not murdered, and I am not missing, but parts of me have scattered and disappeared. As Tom mentioned, I do write a lot about war and the consequence of war, the collateral on a family, and how through writing we can make sense of this. Returning. It is spring and the days less human that he remembered, but that was over 50 years ago at Firebase Bronco, only yards away from this dust-laden street of duck pho, the familiar Nuke Mom scent in the air. He watches, waits to see if harsh looks greet him or our family. From the vendor who approaches, a wooden bar across her shoulders, deep buckets suspended on each end as she sells her wares. From the men and women in the rice paddies with their cone-shaped hats, their bare feet as they pull and they plant. From the elderly woman at the market stand, teeth blackened from betel nuts, who sells steaming bowls of pho we eat greedily. But there is nothing, no one whose eyes speak anything but welcome. The children run across the levee, then turn like the flock of birds over the rice paddy as they rise and they land. The children beside him now, their small hands all vying to touch his shoulders for the photo I'll take, the one that will show him standing straight, smiling, and they seem to be lifting him impossibly far. I had a privilege in my work as artist in residence to be assigned an elementary school here in the Valley. And I was there for a month before we ever heard of COVID. And here's a poem I wrote from that experience. It is day one and 2 kids are already crying. One from the sheer overwhelm of the day, one from spilling out her story that her mother left and may never return. Day 2. After class, the teacher tells me the little boy with a sullen scowl sleeps in a car by the side of Highway 99. I was asked to teach poetry about civil rights, so I asked the students grades 3 to 5 to write about bullying, about women they look up to. I ask them to describe their skin, what they feel about themselves beneath it. I tell them to show us through their words, letting us hear the sounds used when their name is called, whether in anger or praise. I urge them to press their secrets on the page. Day 3. The boy who wakes up in a car on the side of the road is raising his hand to read. My skin is like peach pit, like a bubble bath, like the sun on a rainy day, like a screaming child when you give them a stuffed animal. My skin is happiness, like a simple day on the beach. My skin is love. My skin is the night breeze. The teacher says it's the first time she's seen him respond to anything since September. In some classes, there are too many for the teacher and me to manage. The students who cannot even at age 9 write their last names. The students who cannot stay seated, cannot read their own words. Maybe they will think about their skin, learn to entrust us with their feelings, buried deep. I want to take them there through poetry where it's okay to feel. Sometime in their lives, I tell them, they will need this skill to write a sentence that will free them. I'd like to finish this part of the reading with 3 poems about my own search to find roots of my own family, and especially after visiting some of the Eastern European towns that still hold onto their secrets. Upon finding the house where cousin Viola lived during the Holocaust, Ružomberok, Slovakia. Outside the window, the Vaal River still winds its way past the door as if nothing had happened, as if only the old floorboards could share the secrets of boots that tried on them, the way chair cushions hold the imprint of each daughter, each son. Suddenly, a storm, a low hum that shoves the jacaranda leaves up and over the tiled roof as it builds to a roar. The chimney flue shrieks a stiff-legged march, and the gate swings back and forth, keeping time with the fury. I've been told the tempest at our door found Viola this quickly, lasting long enough for her to swallow 1 pill of cyanide while she waited for the rain. This is a relatively new poem, and it was written after I gave an assignment to the creative writing workshops that I lead in a girls' prison. And I asked them to write a spoken word as if they were in the mirror pointing a finger at themselves. And something I needed to write, and I went home and wrote this. And especially relevant these days as hate and extremist groups, including deniers, have become emboldened. Have you ever had kugel? You've never had kugel. Not until you've eaten it in an alley cafe in the Jewish Quarter in Krakow in a shy November light, around the corner from where your grandparents once lived, now a vacant lot. You've never had kugel. The noodles cooked tender and moist, layered with fresh-made cottage cheese mixed with cinnamon, plump dried raisins, a dollop of sour cream, and served on a blue patterned plate with a cloth napkin. Not until it's served to you by a Yiddish-speaking woman in an apron as she runs to greet you from the cafe kitchen as if you just arrived for Shabbos dinner. Kugel doesn't taste the same unless one hand is holding it while looking out the side window. A shot fired, dogs approaching in the distance. Not until there are holes bored in the walls of your mother's museum of shattered memories in the attic trunk, and each time you try to peek inside, she cries, so you're careful to keep the lock tight. Kugel satisfies unless you choke it down like fear, scanning the exits as you learn Cousin Viola must have done, as she opened the vial and wondered if the poison would be painful. No, you've never had Kugel. Not in your ceiling fan poetry writing post-graduation trip to see where your family perished. Not until you finally arrive at Auschwitz and you walk under that gate inscribed, "Work set you free," and the crematoriums appear with the tracks in, where the stricken faces from every photo you've ever seen from the camps lie like ghosts on the bed's rusty frames, until you have to run outside, gasping for air. Until you finally get it, that their Kugel was carved from sweat and cold winds, seasoned with a mixture of dread and faith, then steamed in the world's blind eye. And I ask you again, have you ever had Kugel? I thought I'd end this part of the reading with one poem that I wasn't going to include, but when I woke up this morning, news from Richmond was on the radio. And so it's a poem I wrote about one of the most iconic teachers I had. And I grew up in a town in Southern Virginia across the Appomattox River from where the Battle of the Crater took place in Petersburg. Dear Miss Turner, you dazzled us with your devotion to the South and the Confederate flag, how you broke into song, not caring about the snickering in the back of the room. While the spitwads flew, you paraded all 70-year-old 4'6" frame of you up and down the rows of old desks. I held onto every drawled syllable of your tales. I couldn't have even joined the Daughters of the American Revolution chapter you founded on our town, not with my just off the boat Eastern European Jewish roots. But you gave me that award, the DAR, at the end of 7th grade, and I still keep it in the top drawer of my dresser in that little box. You probably never knew I majored in history, and that I taught a course on the Civil War in Richmond the same year I marched with Martin Luther King in DC. I was working in a place you once said you'd never step your Southern loving foot in when my mother sent me a letter with news of your death. I can imagine how upset you'd be hearing your beloved statue of Confederate soldiers are now targets for demolition and revile, with your Daughters of the Confederacy roots embedded in their foundations. But you wouldn't flinch. You'd hold your head high, Susie Turner, still hand out that assignment after Christmas break, asking us to reimagine that the South had won the war. Even back then, I knew we were rooting for different teams, and I admired that. Each of us entrenched, unflappable. Thank you. That's the end of that set. If you have any questions.
Not yet,
Okay.
but plenty of comments.
Okay.
Thank you for such a rich reading.
Thank you.
We were rooting for different teams. What a wonderful image. So I was just listing things here. Poetry is like driftwood, a chance to heal, fear of friendly fire. So wonderful images.
Thank you.
So I'm waiting to hear what the next section is going to bring.
Well, I have one, if you don't have any questions, I just brought one extra poem to read at the end.
Okay.
Great.
Well, do you want to do that at the end of the Q&A?
Yes.
All right.
Exactly, that's perfect.
All right. Well, thank you, Marilyn.
You're welcome.
Very much. So I would like you to imagine applause. And the applause is coming from the people that are watching this live stream.
Thank you.
So thank you for the such a rich and heartfelt, I would say rich and heartfelt reading. Fear of friendly fire, an enemy that refuses to show his face. Trying hard to dream peace. These are just some of the things that caught my attention. Our scared, empty hands. They click in and click out. Sweeps us into the march. To burn it down, to feel its warmth. Parts of me have scattered and disappeared. Parts of me have scattered and disappeared. Turn like a flock of birds. One day you will need that to write a sentence that will free you. Have you ever had Kugel? Have you ever had Kugel? Unless you choke it down like fear. So thank you, Marilyn, for such a rich reading.
Thank you.
Let's proceed to the questions and answers, if you're ready for that.
Sure.
Okay. Well, let's start with, what are you reading? And who are you reading?
Let's see, I was thinking of that in case you asked. I think on my nightstand I have a Marie Howell, Mary Carr. I liked reading those. And a new author to me, who's both a poet and a prose writer, is Ocean Vuong. He's quite outstanding. And Yusuf Kamanyaka, too, is someone that I read, pick up his book and read. And then I've certainly been reading a lot of Oregon local and fabulous poets. And that if I started naming them, I would leave out someone and I'd feel terrible. But we have some such fine writers and up and down the valley and, of course, all corners of the state.
Here's some comments from the chat.
Okay.
Susie Harris says, a museum of shattered memories. Powerful. Pauline Peterson says, thank you, Marilyn. The Poetry Box, the Poeming Pigeon, the Kugel poem, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Another comment from that from Andrea Hollander, your Kugel poem, wow. So a lot of comments here about the Kugel poem. I'd like to ask you a couple of things about that were in the piece that the Clackamas Review did, and the reporter interviewed you. And you've talked about protest, certainly, but could you talk some more about using words to protest, and how you arrived at that notion?
I mean, I think of the iconic Pablo Neruda, who realized that the only thing of danger here is poetry. So I think as writers, and certainly all writing, but we can say it in a way that hopefully resonates for people, and say it in a very compact way that maybe sears into the point of what we were trying to say. I'm not sure which famous writer, Faulkner probably, said, I was going to be a poet and I didn't have time, so I became a novelist. And so So I do think that poetry lends itself to being the fabulous. The Black Lives Matter, of course, after George Floyd's death, the anthology that I'm lucky enough to be part of was for this to show in many ways, and we're a mixed cultural group, to approach what was happening during that time. And I think in many ways there's, during this period, I'm sure there's a lot of writing that is, if it isn't in print, will be about using poetry in protest. Mm-hmm. I think it's always been, and Wisława Szymborska, I read her a lot, and she's definitely one that I think says it just searingly beautifully. And even in translation, there's, you get chills reading it. Luckily, there's people who can put her words into so that we get that same sense of the intensity of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing about that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask Jane if she has any questions.
Well, I'm just wondering, what were the themes or ideas or feelings that you first had when you first started writing poetry? Where did it start coming from?
When I first started writing?
Yeah.
I think I wrote, and I told the Clackamas Review when Jalen interviewed me, I think I wrote some when I was young. I call it our tortured little love poems. but mostly it was really when, around war, when I really realized how much some of the ways that I felt I could best heal by seeing things through my eyes, where someone's so close to a situation, it's hard for them to write. Mm-hmm. And so and my husband's been wonderful about it, because he knew he couldn't, but he's seen everything I've ever written about our family and him, and if you ever do really recover from war, but the process. And that has just, it launched me into working with veterans, and then working with kids who are incarcerated, and kids in Title I schools. I feel that need that people should write. Thank goodness there are people who just want to write about flowers. I envy them always. I wish I could just, I could start out with a flower, and then it would come, turn out to be something totally different. But I think that's what really started me writing. And then once you start that faucet, it's hard to stop it. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of my friends, a lot of the people maybe that are watching, certainly the people that commented that you mentioned, fabulous writers, that I think we all maybe can say that once we started figuring it out, how could we stop, and how could we not want others to do that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question about the Kugel poem from David Etlin. So he says it was stunning. Brought him to tears. Was it written quickly or take many hours to craft?
Well, I would say in my head it took probably 30 years. But once I gave that assignment, it was amazing how quickly I could get it down. I just didn't know how I was going to frame it. Once I started, I realized, that's poking at myself in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And it's a technique that started me really getting it down on paper. But I think a lot of us too, and Tom, you probably do too, is we wear something around a long time before we ever get it. I've done that with film, I've done it with poetry. You wear it around, and I like to, just like you would in a film, you visualize something. I want it to be visual. I want someone to see it. And the best compliment that I ever get is someone says, I could really see that. I was right there. I was right there in the car. I was right there, in that cafe. This woman was running around and speaking Yiddish, and,
Mm-hmm.
because I always wish I had known my grandparents and been able to hear that. And how do you convey that without just saying it just like that, you know? So.
Well, thank you for that. What's a response you got from an at-risk child, an at-risk kid that moved you the most?
What messages I got as a child?
No, what response? You talk in the article, you've talked here about working in the schools and working with at-risk kids. What's a response that's moved you the most?
Right. Well, I think the poem I read today, because I've written other poems about going into schools or going in the prison, but I think that boy that read that poem, it's just, I could hardly read that, the emotion of that. And the teacher was just blown away. I mean, she's been trying to work on it, because I think this was probably near Christmas break when I was in there. So it had been December. You know, it was just stunning to hear him read, to respond, to have something that responded, that worked for him. So that's one. Tons every day. I certainly working with the girls who are incarcerated, that they've just, as I said in the article in the Clackamas Review, that they've just been through a different kind of war. And the things that they figure out, and you can almost hear the aha when they're writing, and they have to want to be in the class. So I certainly have, in that situation, different than in a school. When you go in, you're going to see every kid every time you go in, every class of maybe 25 to 30 kids in 6 classes. Not everybody held their hand up that they wanted to be there, but these girls do, and it's if anything happens that as an infraction, they don't get to come to the class, and so they want to be there, and there's nobody there saying you got to write. I tell them it's the only thing though that they have to do. They don't have to do anything, but they have to be there, and they have to want to pick up the pencil. But I didn't have to even say that. And it's been 8 years. So it's many moments of thinking, that's why I do this.
Yeah, that's coming across. Yeah. So thank you for doing that and for sharing this. That came across in the interview I thought that you did with the Clackamas Review reporter. What's advice you would give a new writer?
I don't know if advice is what I'm going, but as far as, you know, it's kind of trite maybe, but writing your truths. I think that if it feels false to you, it's going to feel false in your writing. And, you know, what do they say? In every truth, there's a little fiction. So you can massage the fine details a little bit, but I think if you're writing something that's real, and I don't mean sentimental, if it doesn't take someone to a place where they have to be, and mostly it's yourself. You know, if you're writing something that speaks to you, hopefully it'll come across to your audience. And basically, don't we write for ourselves, but we share it because of the people on this live stream and listening. But we're writing to figure it out. Like I said, we're the driftwood. You know, how did we, you know, well, how did we get broken on the way here?
Poetry is like driftwood. Yeah, write your truth.
Right.
Is something you would say. Here's something more from the chat. Pandina Tessely says, thank you, Marilyn. And then, your poems move people to action. Yes, poetry is dangerous. Your poems move people to action. Yes, poetry is dangerous.
I like that. Thank you, whoever said that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Pandina Tessely. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
I don't think of myself as a very dangerous person, but I like that if something I wrote sounded a little dangerous.
Well, that notion of protest weaves through what you said in your poems. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because you're saying that you don't see yourself as a poet of protest.
Right.
But it's there.
Right. I think of myself, this is a great question, I think of myself as a poet of witness more than protest. You know, in Chiapas and other poems that I've written when we've gone back to Vietnam in that situation, and just without hardly moving a muscle, we can see injustices. I think I've spent a lot of my life working in human rights, and I think that is.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. But I think that, you know, it's our duty to own up and our own responsibility for the stories we didn't know or what we thought we knew, and we realized that we knew nothing. And that's where the poem What Matters is that we've got to start listening to other people's stories. We can criticize, we can be totally, and I think the people who probably come to poetry readings are, you know, we might be a little more homogeneous in terms of what we think about human rights. But I don't want to change. I don't want anyone to feel they have to believe what I do, but I do want to hear their story. And of course, the last year and a half, we've had lots of opportunities that people politically diverse, and we have to learn how to live in this world with people. And so I want to listen to them. I may not agree, but I want to hear their story because it informs me why they act the way they do. So if that's protest, I'm still going to write what I think is true, but I don't deny them that somewhere their driftwood got them where they were. And I want to understand that better.
Well, of all the takeaways tonight, that's maybe a wonderful one to end with. And I'm going to repeat it again in the closing. But I think you have a poem.
I do. I think you asked me to bring one last, and this is a little gentler.
Yeah.
Good. I thought I'd give you and the audience a little bit of break. But so this again just happened before the pandemic, and it right in the neighborhood. Wild Horse Adoption Day. The young horse, as yet unnamed, is quiet in the half-acre of the next-door neighbor's yard. I'd worried how it would go this first night penned in the unfamiliar. Forecast as the hottest night so far of summer, we'd be sure to leave our windows open. We feared being awakened as she kicked and whinnied while the Perseid meteors streaked across the skies. But she made no sound, raised no fuss, that one. Her small face peeking at me in the half moon from the slatted fence, hastily erected. And I wondered what this filly was thinking, alone, apart from her herd that once ran wild, no borders to contain them. They are in her blood, the meadows, the never-ending skies, her nimble hooves that free could stamp a path in the forest beyond our house, breathe her name into the morning air. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, for a very rich and heartfelt reading tonight. What a wonderful way to kick off the 15th season of the Milwaukie Poetry Series. We are absolutely delighted that you are here. Judith Barrington is going to be here in October, so we hope you all will log in for that. And Where you can purchase Marilyn's books is going to come up on the credits, or it should be there, and give a look at that. I'm going to end, as I said, with the last takeaway that Marilyn talked to us about. Witness. We witness our own responsibility, and we must listen to other people's stories, or things that I heard. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Thank you for being here tonight. We'll see you next month. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Hogan.